I still remember that morning as if it had etched itself into my very bones. The sun was soft, slipping quietly through the curtains, brushing my face with gentle light. I stood by the kitchen window, holding a warm cup of tea, feeling its heat seep slowly into my hands. For a moment, I thought everything was normal. Just another morning. Just another day in the life I had built for decades. But then he walked in. My husband. The man I had shared my life with. The man I had loved, cared for, and supported in ways no one would ever know. I expected a smile, a greeting, something that would let me know he saw me. He didn't look at me. He didn't smile. He didn't even say good morning. He just walked past, his eyes glued to the screen of his phone. And in that moment, I felt invisible, as if all the years of cooking, cleaning, worrying, loving, and giving had disappeared in an instant. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. He must be tired. He must be busy. Life had changed. Maybe he had too. But deep inside, a small voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. He doesn't see you anymore. I didn't speak. I didn't ask him why. I only placed his breakfast on the table the way I had done every morning for over 20 years. I watched him pick it up without a word, and then he was gone. The warmth of our shared life replaced by a cold, quiet distance. For a long moment, I just stood there, gripping my cup, staring out the window. The bird outside chirped softly, oblivious to the storm growing inside me. A wave of memories washed over me. All the mornings I had woken before anyone else. The nights I had stayed up worrying. The silent sacrifices no one had acknowledged. And suddenly, the realization hit me. I had been forgotten. Not in a dramatic, loud way. Not with shouting or anger. Just quietly, subtly, invisibly. My presence, my love, my care, all taken for granted, all overlooked. And in that silence, something inside me began to shift, something that would change everything. It was a simple, ordinary morning, and yet it was the day my life began to feel different. The day I realized that the person I had loved most no longer recognized the depth of my sacrifices. The day he looked at me, not with anger or frustration, but as if I were a stranger. And that was the moment I knew that everything I had lived for, everything I had given, might no longer matter in the way I had believed it did. I had always believed that love was simple, that life together meant sharing quiet mornings, laughter over small meals, and a sense of comfort that needed no words. Our home was modest, warm, and filled with the little things that made it ours: a faded dining table, a well-worn couch, family photos on the walls, and a shelf lined with books I had collected over the years. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. My husband and I had been together for over 2 decades. We had built a life quietly, piece by piece, with small gestures of care, countless shared responsibilities, and the kind of patience that only comes from years of loving someone every day. I had devoted myself to this family, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely wanted to see our life run smoothly, to see everyone happy. Our children were grown now, but when they were young, I had spent sleepless nights nursing fevers, preparing school lunches before sunrise, and holding their tiny hands while they learned to walk. I had watched over every birthday, every scraped knee, every tear and laugh. I had built routines and rituals, small, meaningful ways to ensure that love and warmth filled our home. And my husband? He had his own struggles, of course, work that exhausted him, responsibilities that sometimes left him irritable or distracted. But I had always been there, quietly supporting him, helping with his projects, listening when he needed to talk, offering advice only when asked. I had hoped he knew, somehow, that I was always there. Our mornings were usually calm. I would wake before anyone else, brewing tea or coffee while the house was still. The sunlight would creep gently across the kitchen floor, and I would take a deep breath, preparing myself for the day. Sometimes I would watch him from the doorway, smiling softly at the familiar rhythm of his morning routine. There was comfort in these small moments, a sense that we were together even in silence. But life is not always gentle. Over the years, little things began to shift. Small misunderstandings, unnoticed gestures, quiet disappointments. I began to notice the way he no longer glanced my way when he walked into the kitchen, the way he would scroll through his phone while I prepared breakfast, the way his words sometimes lacked the warmth they once held. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that he was tired, that the world outside demanded so much from him. I told myself that life changes and perhaps it was only a phase. I would continue to do what I always had, pouring my energy into the house, into the children, into our shared life. Because that is what love had always meant to me, giving without expecting anything in return. And yet, deep inside, a quiet unease began to settle. There were mornings when I stood by the window, tea in hand, and felt a pang of loneliness, even in the familiar warmth of our home. I would watch him sit at the table, absorbed in his phone, and feel the ache of being unseen. Not ignored in anger, not hurtful words exchanged, but simply invisible. I began to remember the first years of our marriage, the excitement, the passion, the way he looked at me with eyes full of admiration and love, how we used to laugh together, dream together, plan our future side by side. And yet, as the years passed, those moments became less frequent. The routines we once cherished became habits without attention. Love had not disappeared, but it had grown quiet, almost unnoticed. Still, I found comfort in the little routines I had created for myself and for my family. Preparing meals, organizing the house, making sure everything ran smoothly. I would tidy up even when it was already clean, fold laundry even when no one noticed, and offer help even when it went unacknowledged. It was in these small gestures that I found purpose, even if no one else did. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, worrying about him, about the children, about the future. The time I spent ensuring that bills were paid, meals were planned, and everyone had what they needed. I remembered the mornings I sacrificed sleep so that everyone could start their day on time. The hours spent quietly supporting him when he faced difficulties, never asking for recognition. Life had been built on these silent acts of love. I had never expected grand gestures or elaborate praise. A simple acknowledgement, a smile, a gentle word, that was enough. And yet, over time, those small gestures seemed to fade into the background, unnoticed, unappreciated. I loved him deeply. I still do. But love, I began to realize, is not only about giving, it is also about being seen. It is about feeling valued, even in the quietest moments. And I had begun to feel the weight of being invisible, unnoticed, forgotten in the life I had poured myself into so completely. It was not sudden. There was no single argument, no loud confrontation, just quiet mornings that felt emptier than they had before. Days when his attention seemed elsewhere. Moments when I would speak and he would nod absent-mindedly, lost in thought, unaware of the words I offered. And I began to understand that the world I had known, the warmth, the recognition, the silent understanding between us, was slowly shifting. And yet, even in this quiet unease, I carried on. I brewed my tea, made breakfast, tended the house. I reminded myself that life was not about complaints or resentment. It was about love. It was about care. And I had always been willing to give that, even when it wasn't noticed. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm was growing. A quiet storm of longing, of hurt, of a need to be seen. And I did not yet know that this storm would one day reach its turning point. That the man who had once looked at me with love and admiration would, in one simple moment, look at me as if I were a stranger. It began with small things, almost unnoticeable at first. A word left unsaid, a glance that lingered elsewhere, a touch that felt absent. I tried to tell myself that life had changed, that people grow and shift, that we all become a little distracted with the weight of responsibilities. But slowly, these small cracks began to widen, and I could no longer ignore them. One morning, as I poured coffee into our mugs, I noticed him staring at the newspaper, not really reading, just scrolling absent-mindedly with a frown. "Did you sleep well?" I asked softly, hoping for a small smile, a simple acknowledgement. Mm, he murmured, eyes still fixed on the pages. No glance, no warmth, just a sound that felt hollow. I forced a smile, telling myself not to take it personally. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps work had been exhausting. And yet, my heart sank. Those little moments, once filled with connection, now felt like reminders of distance. Over the following weeks, it became harder to ignore. Conversations were shorter, responses delayed, and laughter had faded from our home. I would ask questions about his day, about the children, about life in general, and receive one-word answers or distracted nods. I began to notice the pattern. Whenever I tried to share something, he seemed distant, as if my words were just noise in the background. I remember one evening in particular. We were sitting at the dining table, plates half empty, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I tried to talk about a small challenge at work, hoping to share a moment, to feel connected. "Do you think I handled it well?" I asked quietly. He didn't look up. He said, "I guess." His voice was flat, uninterested. I felt a pang of sadness I could barely describe. I had spent hours preparing, thinking, worrying, and now my concern seemed invisible. I wanted to speak, to explain, to tell him how much effort went into that small moment. But I stopped myself, fearing that anything I said would only push him further away. Even the children noticed. One day, my daughter came into the kitchen, tilting her head at the quiet tension in the room. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked softly. I forced a smile, brushing her question aside. "Yes, everything's fine," I said. But even I could feel the fragility in my own voice. I didn't want them to see the cracks in our family life. I wanted to protect them from the truth, from the slow, creeping sadness that had begun to settle over our home. And yet, the tension grew. There were mornings when he would leave for work without a word. No thank you for the breakfast I had made. No glance of appreciation. Nights when he returned, tired and distant, barely making eye contact. I would stand at the doorway watching him sit on a couch scrolling through his phone and feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts pressing against my chest. I began to question myself. Had I done something wrong? Was there something I could change? I replayed every interaction, every word, every gesture, searching for an explanation. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing seemed to fix the invisible distance growing between us. The turning point, though, was not a single event, but a series of small betrayals that piled up quietly, one after another. One evening, I had spent hours preparing his favorite meal, a simple dish he loved, something that reminded him of our earlier days together. I set the table carefully, lit a small candle, hoping for a warm evening together. When he came home, he barely noticed. He sat down, picked at the food without comment, scrolling through his phone the entire time. I tried to make small talk, asking about his day, sharing a story about our daughter. He nodded, murmured a response, and returned to his screen. I felt this strange ache, a sense of invisibility I had never experienced before. The effort, the love, the care I had poured into this simple evening, it seemed to mean nothing. I wanted to cry, but I held it back. Tears would have been too loud, too noticeable. I could not let him see the hurt that was growing quietly inside me. Days turned into weeks, and I noticed the patterns becoming more pronounced. He would make decisions without consulting me. Small things at first, household purchases, plans for the weekend, choices that used to be shared. I tried to speak up, gently, calmly, explaining my thoughts, my feelings, hoping for understanding. "Why didn't you ask me?" I asked one evening as he finalized the plan for a family trip. He looked at me briefly, shrugging. "I thought it would be easier this way." Easier for him. I felt the sting of those words. Not a consideration, not a discussion, just a decision that I had no part in. And I began to see a pattern emerging, one that I could not ignore. My voice, my presence, my contributions, they seemed to matter less and less. I tried to hold on to patience. I reminded myself that love is about giving, that relationships have seasons of distance and closeness. I told myself that this was temporary, that life sometimes grows complicated, that the man I loved deeply had simply lost his attention for a while. But reality is persistent, and one afternoon, as I walked past the living room, I overheard a conversation that would plant the seed of betrayal in my heart. He was on the phone, speaking in a tone I had never heard before, casual, dismissive, almost cold. I could not hear every word, but the familiarity and care that I had once expected in his voice was gone. I did not confront him immediately. I wanted proof, clarity, understanding. But the moment lingered in my mind, haunting the quiet spaces of our home. Every glance, every touch, every smile that had once reassured me now seemed distant, like a memory of someone I had loved but no longer knew. Even the smallest gestures that once meant everything, a hand on my shoulder, a glance across the room, a soft word of encouragement, had disappeared. I began to notice how often he avoided my eyes, how quickly he dismissed my attempts at conversation, how indifferent he had become. It was during these weeks, as I tried to navigate the growing tension, that I began to question everything I had done for our family. Had my sacrifices gone unnoticed? Had my efforts been meaningless? I had devoted myself to this home, to our children, to him, and yet the acknowledgement, the warmth, the love I had taken for granted seemed to vanish slowly, leaving me unsure of my place in the life I had built. I began keeping my thoughts quiet, retreating into small routines. I would fold laundry, tidy the kitchen, organize the books on the shelf, anything to occupy my mind and keep the sadness at bay. I whispered reminders to myself that love is not about recognition, that devotion is its own reward. But in the silent moments when I sat alone in our living room, I felt the weight of being forgotten pressing down on me. And yet I still hoped. I still believed that the man I had loved for years could see, could remember, could acknowledge. I still held on to the small moments that had once connected us. The way he used to smile at me across the kitchen, the way he laughed at my stories, the gentle way he would touch my hand when he thought no one was looking. But hope, I began to realize, is fragile when faced with repeated neglect. And in the quiet of our home, I started to understand that the life I had taken for granted, the love I had assumed would always be present, was slowly shifting. The cracks were whitening, and I did not yet know how deep the fracture would go. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The house was still, bathed in soft light streaming through the windows. The smell of brewed coffee and fresh bread filled the kitchen, but I hardly noticed. My mind was heavy, carrying the weight of weeks of distance, silence, and unspoken tension. I had been hoping, praying even, that something would shift, that he would remember, that he would see me, that he would recognize all I had done. I found him sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at a stack of papers. His expression was distant, as if he were somewhere far away, somewhere I could not reach. I walked closer, my footsteps soft against the floor. My heart beat faster, both in hope and in fear. "I made breakfast," I said gently, placing the plate in front of him. He barely looked up. "Thanks," he muttered. I felt a hollow ache inside me. Weeks of small neglect had built into this quiet, unbearable moment. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady, as I asked, "Are you okay? Did you sleep well?" He looked at me then and I froze. It wasn't the tired, distracted look I had grown used to. It was something colder, harder, the kind of gaze you give to a stranger. He studied me for a moment, as though trying to remember who I was, and then he looked away. That was the first time I truly felt it, that I had become invisible in the life I had created. Not just overlooked, but forgotten. Not just unappreciated, but erased. I swallowed hard and forced myself to sit across from him. My hands shook slightly as I poured my coffee, trying to act normal, trying to pretend that the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. "You've changed," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His words were soft, but carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "I don't know who you've become." I blinked, stunned. My mind searched for a response, but no words came. I had devoted my life to this family, to this home, to him. I had given my heart completely, and now he spoke to me as if I were someone else entirely. I, I'm still the same," I said carefully, my voice quiet but firm. "I've just been trying to keep everything together." He shook his head. "It doesn't feel that way anymore." The world seemed to stop. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away, but I couldn't. I had always believed in calm, in understanding, in gentle patience, and now all of that seemed to crumble around me. Over the next few hours, the conversation unfolded slowly, painfully. Words that I had hoped to never hear came out one by one. He spoke of resentment, of feeling overlooked, of believing that I no longer cared about him. Every word felt like a blade, cutting deeper than I thought possible. "I don't know why I stayed silent for so long," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I feel like everything you've done, it's like it never mattered to me." I wanted to explain, to tell him how hard I had worked to keep the family together, how every decision, every sacrifice had been for him, for us, for the children, but the words seemed futile. How could I convey years of devotion in a few sentences? How could I make someone understand the depth of love that had gone unnoticed? I remembered the nights I had stayed awake, worrying about bills, about the children, about the little things that keep a home alive. I remembered the mornings I had rushed to make breakfast, pack lunches, and still find time to listen to his concerns. And now, all of that, every effort, every act of love seemed to vanish in a single moment of neglect and misunderstanding. Tears rose in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wanted to stay strong, to show him that I could endure this, that I could still hold myself together. I wanted him to see me, to recognize the depth of my heart, even if he could not feel it yet. "I've done everything I could for this family," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Every sacrifice, every choice, every little thing, I did it all out of love. Can you not see that?" He looked away, silent for a long moment. The air between us was heavy, thick with unspoken pain and regret. And then he spoke words I will never forget. I I don't remember any of it. I don't remember what it was like when you cared for me. I I don't see you anymore. It was like a cold wind had blown through my chest. My heart broke in a way I had never imagined possible. I had loved him, trusted him, devoted myself completely, and in an instant, all of it felt erased. For a while, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that screams in your ears, that fills the room with invisible weight. I tried to breathe, to steady myself, to find some grounding in the chaos of my emotions. But it was difficult. I had always believed that love was enough, that devotion could bridge gaps, heal wounds, and overcome neglect. And yet, in that moment, I realized that love alone could not always protect you from being forgotten. Later that day, I found myself in the living room, sitting on the couch, staring at a photo of our wedding, a time when everything had felt full, vibrant, unshakable. The memory of that day, of his laughter, of the promises we made the pain even sharper. How could someone forget so easily what we had built together? How could years of shared life dissolve into indifference so quietly? It was then that I understood. The turning point was not just his words, not just the look in his eyes, not just the absence of recognition. It was the realization that the life I had poured myself into, the love I had given unconditionally, could be unseen, unacknowledged, and even forgotten by someone I trusted most. That afternoon, I walked to the window and looked outside. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing softly through the house. A part of me wanted to run to them, to hold them close, to protect them from the heartbreak that now seemed to hover over our home. And yet, another part of me felt a strange, quiet clarity. I realized that I could not force him to remember, to acknowledge, or to appreciate. I could not control his feelings, his memories, or his perceptions. All I could control was myself, my heart, my actions, my ability to find peace within the chaos. It was a painful, humbling moment, but also a turning point. I understood, in a way I had never understood before, that love is not always about being seen. Sometimes it is about enduring quietly, about holding on to your dignity and your values, even when others cannot recognize them. That afternoon, I walked to the window and looked outside. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing softly through the house. A part of me wanted to run to them, to hold them close, to protect them from the heartbreak that now seemed to hover over our home. And yet, another part of me felt a strange, quiet clarity. I realized that I could not force him to remember, to acknowledge, or to appreciate. I could not control his feelings, his memories, or his perceptions. All I could control was myself, my heart, my actions, my ability to find peace within the chaos. It was a painful, humbling moment, but also a turning point. I understood, in a way I had never understood before, that love is not always about being seen. Sometimes it is about enduring quietly, about holding on to your dignity and your values, even when others cannot recognize them. That evening, as I prepared dinner in silence, I made a decision. I would continue to love, yes, but I would also protect myself. I would honor my own heart, my own sacrifices, my own worth, and I would find a way to navigate this life, even if it meant doing so without the recognition I had once thought was inevitable. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection. He spoke less, avoided my gaze, and I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the connection I had once assumed was permanent. I cried alone at times, letting the tears fall softly, cleansing the ache that had built up inside me. I wrote in my journal, pouring out thoughts and emotions I could not share with anyone else. And slowly, ever so slowly, I began to understand that my life was not defined by his perception, but my own heart, my own actions, and my own capacity to endure. The turning point, painful as it was, became a moment of awakening. I saw clearly for the first time the fragility of human memory, the limits of recognition, and the quiet power of inner strength. I understood that betrayal does not always come with anger or shouting. Sometimes it arrives as silence, as absence, as the simple act of being forgotten. And in that understanding, I found a small, flickering light of resilience. I would continue to love, continue to care, but I would also honor myself. I would not allow someone else's forgetfulness to erase my worth, my history, or the life I had built. And as I stood in the quiet of our home, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. A calm born from the recognition that even when unseen, even when forgotten, I remained whole. The days following that morning were quiet, almost painfully so. The house felt different, heavier somehow, yet there was a strange space opening up inside me. For so long, I had defined myself through his recognition, his approval, his presence. But now, in the stillness of our home, I began to understand something I had never truly grasped before. My worth was not dependent on anyone else's acknowledgement. I spent time with the children, watching them play and listening to their laughter. It reminded me of the simple joys that had always been there, even in the midst of tension. Their smiles were a gentle anchor, keeping me grounded. I began to notice little things I had overlooked in the past, the way the sunlight fell across the kitchen floor, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the quiet evening, the way a cup of tea warmed my hands. These small details became my refuge, a reminder that life continued, even when hearts grew distant. One evening, I sat by the window, a cup of tea in my hands, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the years I had devoted to this family, the sacrifices I had made, the countless moments when I had put their happiness before my own. And I allowed myself to feel both the grief and the pride of it. Yes, he had forgotten. Yes, he had failed to see me, but I had acted with love. I had given my best. And that, I realized, was enough. I began to set small boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I allowed myself to say no to things that drained me unnecessarily. I let go of the expectation that he would change overnight or remember what I had done. And in doing so, a quiet strength grew within me. I discovered that loving someone does not always require their gratitude. Sometimes, love is about holding space for yourself as well. I started keeping a journal again, something I had neglected over the years. Writing became a way to process my feelings, to give them form and voice. Each page was a conversation with myself, an affirmation of my experiences and emotions. Slowly, the weight of being forgotten began to lift, replaced by a calm understanding of who I was and what I had endured. I also reached out to friends I had lost touch with, people who reminded me of my life outside the confines of my home. Their laughter, their advice, their warmth helped me heal in ways I had not anticipated. It was comforting to be seen and heard by others who valued me, even if it was just in small moments. I realized that recognition does not only come from one person. Love and acknowledgement can be found in many corners of life, if only we are willing to open our hearts to it. One afternoon, he approached me quietly, holding a small piece of paper in his hands. It was a note, simple and unadorned, but it carried weight because of what it represented. I I think I've been wrong, he said softly, avoiding my eyes. I don't know how to fix things, but I want to try. I looked at him, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I did not rush into forgiveness. I did not pretend the hurt had vanished, but I allowed myself to be present with him, to see that perhaps there was a beginning here, not a return to the past, but a cautious step forward. We talked that evening, slowly, carefully. I shared my feelings, my grief, my disappointment, and he listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in months. There were tears, yes, but they were gentle, not the bitter kind that tears through the soul. They were the kind that cleanse, that allow for understanding to grow. In the following weeks, we started rebuilding, cautiously, step by step. The tension remained at times, but it was no longer suffocating. Small gestures of care reappeared. A smile across the room, a hand offered in passing, a shared cup of tea in the morning light. Each moment was a reminder that healing does not happen all at once. It is slow, patient, and requires humility from both sides. I also began to recognize the importance of caring for myself, of honoring my own needs and desires. I pursued small joys, reading a book, taking a walk in the evening, listening to music that lifted my spirit. These were not acts of selfishness, but acts of survival and renewal. I realized that I could love deeply while still maintaining my own center, my own identity. Over time, our relationship shifted in subtle ways. The sharp edges of neglect softened into quiet moments of connection. We did not return to the way things had been, but we discovered a new rhythm, one that was imperfect, yes, but more honest. We learned that love is not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it is about the quiet, consistent presence, the willingness to understand and forgive, even when it is hard. I reflected often on what I had learned from this experience. I had learned that love can be fragile, that people can forget, that life can be unexpectedly harsh. But I had also learned that resilience exists within each of us, waiting to be discovered. I had learned that my value is not defined by the recognition of others, but by the integrity of my own heart and actions. There were mornings when I still felt the ache of being forgotten, but those moments no longer controlled me. They were reminders, gentle nudges to continue living with awareness. to continue caring, to continue loving without expectation. I had grown stronger, quieter, more self-assured. The children noticed the change too. They saw a calmer, steadier version of me, one who no longer clung desperately to approval, one who held her ground with love and grace. And in them, I found renewed purpose. My devotion to them had always been unwavering, but now it was balanced by the knowledge that I too deserved care, attention, and respect. One evening, as I sat in the living room watching the sunset, he came to sit beside me. There were no words at first, just a shared quiet, a soft understanding that had grown between us. He reached for my hand and I allowed him to hold it. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than any grand declaration could. It was the acknowledgement that we were both willing to try, willing to heal, willing to see each other again, not as we once were, but as we had become. I understood then that resolution is not about forgetting the past, nor about erasing pain. It is about accepting what has happened, learning from it, and choosing how to move forward with dignity and love. It is about finding balance between hope and realism, between giving and protecting, between love and self-respect. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the house felt lighter. Conversations became gentler. Laughter returned in small doses, and I discovered that peace is not always a dramatic moment, but a series of quiet decisions, small acts of care, and steady presence. I had survived being forgotten, being overlooked, being unappreciated, and in that survival, I had found my strength. I also realized that life is not only about the people who fail to see us, but about those who do, the children, the friends, the strangers who show kindness, the moments of beauty that remind us of our place in the world. I embraced those moments fully, allowing them to heal the cracks that had formed in my heart. In the end, I learned to let go of the need for constant validation. I learned to trust my own heart, my own actions, and the quiet certainty that comes from living a life of integrity and love. I discovered that even when someone forgets, even when they fail to recognize all that we give, our love, our devotion, and our worth remain steadfast, unwavering, and alive. And in that realization, I found a gentle, enduring peace. As the weeks passed, life settled into a gentle rhythm. The house, once heavy with unspoken pain, began to feel alive again. Not because everything had returned to the way it was, but because we had learned to carry the past with us, without letting it weigh us down. I found a quiet joy in the simple moments. The children laughing over breakfast, the soft hum of the kettle boiling in the kitchen, the way the evening sunlight would spill across the living room floor. These ordinary moments became extraordinary to me because I had learned to notice them, to appreciate them, and to be fully present. I learned that healing is not a dramatic, sudden event. It is subtle, often invisible to the outside world, but deeply transformative. It is found in the moments we allow ourselves to breathe, to feel, and to accept what has happened. I realized that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation in the way we once imagined it. Sometimes forgiveness is simply a quiet acknowledgement that life moves on, that people are imperfect, and that our own peace must come first. There were mornings when the memory of his forgetfulness would surface, a pang in my chest reminding me of the hurt I had endured. But even then, I felt a gentle strength within me, a calm that had not been there before. I had survived being overlooked, and in doing so, I had discovered something far more important than anyone else's approval: my own resilience, my own capacity to love, and my own worth. Sitting by the window one afternoon, watching the leaves sway gently in the wind, I thought about everything I had learned. Life is fragile, relationships are complex, and people can disappoint us in ways we never expect. But it is also beautiful, filled with moments of grace, laughter, and quiet love. We cannot control the actions of others, but we can control how we respond, how we carry ourselves, and how we nurture the parts of our hearts that need care and attention. I felt grateful for the small victories, for the peaceful mornings, for the smiles of my children, for the moments when my husband and I could share space without tension or resentment. These moments were proof that even after hurt and disappointment, there is always room for growth, understanding, and a renewed connection. And I knew that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant remembering with gentleness, learning from the past, and choosing how to act with awareness and compassion. It meant valuing myself, holding my own heart tenderly, and recognizing that love is strongest when it includes care for oneself. As I closed my journal that evening, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had endured, I had loved, I had learned, and I had grown. My heart had been tested, and though it carried its scars, it was fuller and wiser than before. I had discovered that peace does not come from the absence of hurt, but from the acceptance of it, and from the courage to continue living with hope and grace. I glanced around the room, the soft light highlighting the familiar details, the family photos, the little messes left by my children, the warmth of the furniture I had chosen with care. Life was imperfect, but it was mine. And in that imperfection, I found a deep, enduring beauty. I realized then that every sacrifice, every moment of love given, every tear shed in silence had shaped me into someone stronger, someone more compassionate, someone capable of embracing life fully, even when it was difficult. And in that embrace, I found a calm, quiet joy that no forgetfulness or hurt could ever take away. So I closed my eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, and smiled softly. Life had tested me, yes, but it had also taught me that even when we feel invisible, even when we are overlooked, we carry within us a light that no one can extinguish. And that light, steady and warm, would guide me forward into every tomorrow.